You're a janitor. Stick to mops, not tiaras." Catherine Vale's voice sliced through the marble lobby like a blade. The CEO of Vale Corp didn't even look directly at David Ellery. Her attention was fixed on the gathered guests, her words meant for their amusement. Laughter echoed, a polite corporate kind, the kind that twisted under your ribs. David didn't flinch. He simply knelt beside Lily again and adjusted the small plastic crown on her head. "She prefers being queen," he said calmly, "but I figured we'd let her have her reign her way. Today." The words were soft, even pleasant, but something about them silenced the room. Catherine blinked. That wasn't defiance. It wasn't subservience either. It was something harder to classify, and harder to forget. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. He was in uniform, janitorial blues, gloves tucked into the belt, cart parked nearby. She was in custom Armani, one stiletto on the edge of the stage, towering above them both. Lily sat in her wheelchair between them, her pink gown a little too long for her legs, a wand clutched in one hand and a paper butterfly taped to the other. Catherine turned away with a scoff. "This is why optics matter. Someone moved that cart." Someone did. David didn't. He looked down at his daughter's face. "All right, Your Majesty," he whispered. "You ready for the parade?" She nodded fiercely. He adjusted the strap on her chair and began rolling her toward the elevator, the long way around, not the one near the stage. She hated that one. Too many eyes, too many steps, too much pity. His back was to the cameras, the suits, the polished smiles, but he felt every glance like heat on skin. The building was glass and steel, wide-paneled screens and frosted staircases. The air smelled like cinnamon diffusers and clean wealth. David belonged here, technically, as the janitor, the one who cleaned the frosted glass when a child's fingerprints ruined the aesthetic. But not as a man with a daughter in a tiara, not as a father helping his little girl play pretend with hand-me-down props and dollar store sparkle. Not here. He'd cleaned this lobby for 3 years. Every spill, every window, every discarded judgment that fell like napkins after champagne. What they didn't know, what none of them ever stopped to ask, was that he used to walk through lobbies like this in tailored suits, with a badge clipped to his chest and a stethoscope tucked into his coat pocket. Not a mop, but that life was a lifetime ago, and it ended the night Lily's MRI came back with a future he could not change. He traded hospital wings for this building. He traded operating rooms for elevators that stuck on floor 9 when it rained. He did it with full awareness, with his name signed in resignation ink, with silence, not regret. He never once regretted choosing her. Still, he knew how they looked at him, not out of cruelty, just with expectation. That people like him were always janitors, not once surgeons, not once fathers trying to rebuild from the inside out. "Daddy," Lily said, voice soft in the corridor. "Were we rude?" "No, sweet pea," he murmured, brushing her hair back. "We were royal." She giggled. They passed a woman near the espresso bar who looked like she wanted to say something. She didn't, just offered a half smile before looking away. That was the part that always gnawed a little, not the cruelty, the polite neglect. The way people stepped over quiet dignity like it was background noise. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. It dinged open. Lily was humming her princess song under her breath. Her wand was tilted. Her crown had shifted again. He knelt one more time, fixed it gently, then pulled out a tiny velvet pouch from his pocket and handed it to her. "For the coronation later," he said. She opened it. Inside was a single glass bead. Purple. "Does this one have a name?" "You get to choose," he said. She considered. "This one's Hope." He smiled. Behind them, the crowd had moved on. The media crew was packing up. The corporate voices returned to schedules and stock and marketing reports. Catherine Vale was surrounded by analysts again. Her granddaughter was somewhere nearby. She wouldn't notice the janitor's absence, or presence, not yet. But the day would come. The day when power and title and money wouldn't solve what was happening in front of her. And when that day arrived, the man with the mop would be the only one who could save what she loved. "Where are you watching from?" Catherine Vale had no idea who she humiliated today, but she'd find out soon. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft sigh, sealing off the echo of clinking glasses and laughter behind them. David stood beside Lily, one hand lightly resting on her wheelchair handle, the other absently adjusting the mop handle clipped to his utility belt. His shoulders remained relaxed, but his eyes were distant, watching something far beyond the brushed steel walls around him. Lily tapped her fingers against the armrest, matching the melody she'd been humming earlier. "Daddy? Yeah, sweetheart? Do you think the Queen ever gets tired of smiling?" David smiled faintly, but didn't answer right away. The elevator glided down in smooth silence. "Maybe," he said finally, "but the good ones, they do it anyway." Lily nodded solemnly, as if this was a truth she already understood. They exited on the lower concourse level, where the service corridor stretched past the boiler room, maintenance lockers, and janitorial supply storage. The scent of industrial soap lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of machinery. Here, there were no sleek wood panels, no curated fragrances, no cameras, just concrete, pipes, and silence. David wheeled Lily into the break alcove where a microwave buzzed quietly and a vending machine blinked with indifference. He poured her juice from the cooler and knelt beside her again, holding the straw steady. "Big day," he said. She sipped carefully, then grinned. "You were the best royal escort." He chuckled, brushing his thumb over her cheek. "You make it easy." From behind the half-wall partition, David could hear the clatter of cleaning carts, the low murmur of the afternoon shift shuffling into rotation. He rose slowly and checked the time. He had about 30 minutes before the second-floor conference room had to be reset for the shareholder dinner. He gathered his supplies, checked his gloves, then turned back. "You okay hanging here for a bit?" Lily nodded. "I've got Queen business." David tapped her crown. "As you should." He made his way down the hallway, wheels squeaking slightly beneath the cleaning cart. With each step, the world folded back into its expected roles. David the janitor, a presence too familiar to question and too invisible to notice. And yet, he noticed everything. He always had. The flickering light over corridor C2 still hadn't been fixed. Third-floor women's restroom stall 2 had a leaking valve, again. And the emergency stairwell by the security annex? Someone had spilled coffee there 2 hours ago. It had been left to dry and stain, but that wasn't what stopped him at the hallway junction. It was the maintenance log, pinned carelessly to the bulletin board. A new policy bulletin had been tacked over it. David's name had been scribbled in, next to an assignment he hadn't requested. End-of-day stage sanitation, main ballroom. His jaw flexed just slightly. It was a setup. He'd already covered the ballroom twice this week. That job rotated by department. But assigning it today, after the event, after Catherine's little outburst, wasn't coincidence. They wanted to make a point. He took the paper down, read it again, then folded it neatly into his pocket. No protest, no performance. But he'd remember. David headed back to the elevator. His mind cataloged the spaces he'd be cleaning, the stage where Catherine stood, the mic she used to belittle him, the steps she'd refused to descend to talk to him directly. And he'd clean it. He always did. But he wasn't who she thought he was. And one day, when the polished shine of her power meant nothing, when the right words failed her, and the right hands trembled with ignorance, she'd realize that the man with the mop wasn't waiting to be elevated. He was choosing to remain. The elevator door opened. He stepped inside. Back upstairs, the executive floor was humming with activity again. Team leads whispering in corners, assistants juggling overlapping schedules, PR reps reviewing footage from the morning's press event. David emerged quietly, heading for the utility closet at the far end. No one acknowledged him, except one. Marla, the receptionist, stood from her desk just as he passed. "Hey, David," she said, almost too softly. He paused. "Hey." She looked really happy today. "Lily." David nodded. "She was." Marla hesitated. "I saw what happened earlier. That wasn't okay." He met her eyes. "It's all right." "No," she said. "It's not. Not when it comes from the top." David didn't reply. Instead, he gave a small, grateful nod, then pushed open the utility door and stepped inside. It smelled like lemon cleaner and rubber soles. He moved automatically, grabbing cloths, replenishing the sanitation bin, rethreading the mop with practiced ease. His hands were steady, but his thoughts were not on soap. They were on Lily, and the future she'd grow up in. He'd spent years preparing for it, not with money or connections, but with presence, with patience, with quiet strength. And now, here in this building of glass and ego and silent judgments, he'd built something else, too. A kind of armor no title could give, and no insult could take away. By the time David reached the ballroom, the echo of laughter had faded into clinking glassware and the occasional scratch of high heels against tile. The space looked different when empty, less like a celebration and more like a stage between acts. The banners still hung from the ceiling, reading, "Future First, Investing in Tomorrow's Girls," in a font too polished to feel sincere. He parked his cleaning cart against the back wall, glancing once at the raised dais where Catherine Vale had stood. The mic was still perched at its angle of superiority. The velvet runner had a small boot print near its edge. Everything else sparkled as it should. David had cleaned dozens of ballrooms, dozens more operating theaters before that. The difference was lighting and ego. Both required you to move with precision and pretend you didn't exist. He started with the back tables first, rolling up linen, discarding half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, collecting champagne flutes with smudges from lip gloss and laughter. Near the sixth table, a man in a blazer was hunched over a laptop, still working. One of the junior VPs, David guessed, the kind who didn't make eye contact with janitors but always noticed if the trash wasn't emptied. The man didn't look up, didn't acknowledge David at all, until a file he was reviewing froze mid-download. A groan escaped him, then a muttered curse, then a slap of palm to keyboard. David paused. "Network issue?" he asked quietly. The man blinked, like noticing a sound he didn't expect to have a voice. "Yeah, server's lagging again. Been happening since yesterday." David crouched near the base of the table, scanned the wiring beneath. The access panel near the podium glowed faintly, the switchboard running warmer than it should. "You've got a short in that extension loop," David said, still casual. "Overload from the LED staging rig. I can reroute the power if you need it to finish the upload." The VP stared. "You... what?" David met his eyes evenly. "You want me to reset it or wait for IT?" The man hesitated, then stepped aside. David knelt at the port, flicked two switches, bypassed the loop, and reset the modem access point, without a second guess. The screen refreshed, the download resumed. "Thanks," the VP said, still frowning like the image didn't quite line up with the label. "No problem." David resumed his work, mop in hand, finishing the pass like nothing had happened. He didn't need to prove anything, but he noticed the sideways glance from the VP, the little crease of confusion, the kind of look people gave when a puzzle piece didn't fit where they expected. Back in the service hallway, David was folding linens when Lily rolled toward him, her wheels squeaking just enough to give her away. "Daddy," she whispered conspiratorially. "Guess what?" He smiled. "What?" "I met a girl named Emma. She has a necklace with her name on it, and she said I looked like a real princess." David crouched beside her. "She's right. She said she wants to sit with me tomorrow. Can she?" David hesitated. Emma Vale, Catherine's granddaughter. He'd seen her in passing. Blonde curls, polished shoes, the kind of posture that came from expensive ballet lessons. He hadn't expected Lily to cross into that orbit. He nodded gently. "If she wants to, sure." Lily beamed. That small beam would become the fracture point later, the moment when two very different worlds touched without judgment. He helped her wheel back to the family lounge on the third floor, the one reserved for guests and visiting relatives of the executive board. They weren't technically supposed to be in there, but the admin who managed it, Marla, looked the other way more often than not. Marla was sitting in the corner, reading a paperback when they arrived. "She made a friend," David said, as Lily settled by the coloring books. "Good," Marla replied. "She deserves one." David moved to the window. From this angle, you could see the main lot where the black cars parked, the CEOs, VPs, and board members. "Did you ever think," Marla said without looking up. That one day someone would recognize you? David's fingers stilled on the edge of the curtain. No, he said softly. That's not why I'm here. Marla marked her page. It might not matter what you want. Some things show themselves anyway. He didn't answer, but he felt it. The shift. The beginning of the contradiction unraveling. A moment here. A phrase there. The brief, puzzled stare of a man who wondered how a janitor knew his power grid. A receptionist who spoke a little too carefully, like she knew more than she let on. The building had eyes, and soon it would start remembering. Catherine Vale was not used to being uncomfortable in her own building, but the moment her elevator doors opened onto the executive floor that morning, she caught sight of the janitor's cart parked just outside the main conference wing, neatly arranged like always, but somehow louder than it should have been. She didn't pause, just walked faster. Behind her, her assistant trailed with a digital tablet, reading off the agenda for the next shareholder alignment briefing. And the internal PR team posted the charity event highlights, got good traction except for a few comments questioning optics, some pushback about tone. What tone? Catherine said flatly, stepping into the corner boardroom. Your comments about the janitor playing dress-up. It was clipped and memed, apparently. Nothing viral, just annoying. Catherine waved her hand dismissively and moved to the head of the table. They want outrage. They'll get over it. We're not here to babysit staff feelings. She didn't say it aloud, but she felt the tension, a grain of grit under all that polish. Still, she had a board to focus on. Numbers, expansion, not blue-collar theatrics and tiaras. The board meeting ran long. The numbers ran longer. No one brought it up again, not directly. But during the post-meeting lounge hour, as coffee was poured into bone-white china cups and shareholders smoothed out their ties, Catherine noticed two things. First, that Marla, the receptionist, wasn't smiling at her usual angle. Her glances were sharper, more focused. And second, that her granddaughter Emma wasn't in the family lounge where she was supposed to be. She found her, eventually, downstairs. Not in the daycare, not in the employee break area, but in the side hallway just outside the janitor's supply closet, legs crossed neatly beneath her party dress, chatting with Lily Ellery as though the two had been lifelong friends. Catherine's heels clicked with precision against the tile. Her expression didn't shift. "Emma," she said, "time to go." Emma looked up, startled. "But I'm playing." "I can see that." Catherine's gaze moved just once to Lily's wheelchair. "Let's not take up people's time, all right?" David stepped out of the supply closet at that moment, wiping his hands with a cloth. Calm, unreadable. "Emma's very kind," he said, not smiling. "They seem to get along." Catherine looked him over, that same subtle sneer curling at the edges of her mouth. "She's polite. That's not the same as friendship." "Sometimes it's how it starts," David said. Emma stood slowly, adjusting the hem of her dress. "She has a crown, Grandma. I want one." "I'm sure you do," Catherine replied. She took Emma's hand and led her away without another word, but something about her posture had shifted, ever so slightly. A stiffness in her shoulder, an awareness she didn't like. By the time they reached the upper floors, she was already dialing her assistant. "Send me the full personnel log on Ellery, maintenance division." "Why?" came the surprised response. "Because something's off." Elsewhere in the building, David wheeled Lily to the small courtyard on the mezzanine, her favorite quiet spot. There was a bench by the glass wall where the sun filtered through just right, and the city buzzed beneath them like background noise. "Was that her grandma?" Lily asked, poking at the straw in her juice cup. "Yeah," David said. "She looked mad." He crouched beside her, brushing a napkin crumb from her knee. "She looked scared." Lily blinked. "Of me?" "No," he said gently. "Of something she doesn't understand." She sat with that for a moment. Then, "Emma said her mom's in a place called rehab." "What's that?" David sighed softly, adjusting her footrest. "It's a place where grown-ups go to get help, sometimes for their body, sometimes for their mind." Lily seemed to consider this deeply. "She said she doesn't see her dad. Ever." David didn't answer that one, just let the silence be enough. Later that evening, in the private executive lounge, Catherine reviewed the personnel file on her tablet. It was thin, thinner than it should have been. David Ellery, age 43, widowed, employed at Vale Corp for 3.5 years, janitorial technician, night rotation. No disciplinary actions, no incident reports, no commendations. A ghost in the system. But there, beneath the surface, she spotted something odd. The emergency contact listed a defunct hospital email. The ID badge registration was a transfer from a closed unit. The original onboarding form was signed in ink, an oddity, in a company that digitalized everything. Catherine tapped her nail against the screen. What were you hiding, Mr. Ellery? And why did your daughter know words like coronation and neurology? She didn't like questions she couldn't answer, especially when they came wrapped in silence and mops and children in wheelchairs who dared to look royal. The contradiction was forming, and it would not stay contained for long. The next day began quietly, almost too quietly. David arrived at the building before sunrise, as he always did, his keycard registering with a soft beep at the lower-level service entrance. He wore his usual uniform, sleeves rolled to the forearms, gloves tucked neatly into his belt. His cart was fully stocked, his gait was calm, but something in the air felt taut. He noticed it in the way security nodded a second too long, in the way the front desk staff gave clipped greetings, eyes flicking up and down like they were trying to reread him through a different lens. Word was getting around. Some piece of it, some fragment of his past, had begun slipping out through the cracks. He didn't mind. He just hoped it wouldn't touch Lily. When he arrived at the family lounge to check on her setup for the day, he found Emma already there, perched on the floor next to Lily's chair, a tiara in one hand and a medical bandage roll in the other. "I'm fixing her scepter arm," Emma announced without looking up. "She has to rule and cast spells." David chuckled softly. "Good engineering." "She said you used to fix brains," Emma added suddenly, still twisting the bandage. David paused. Lily looked up with wide eyes, caught between pride and guilt. "I didn't tell her the secret part," she said quickly. "Just the fixing part." Emma shrugged. "My grandma said I shouldn't be near you, so I wanted to see why." David knelt next to them, took the bandage gently and rewrapped it with cleaner tension. "Well," he said softly, "what did you find out?" Emma thought about it. "You listen better than she does." He gave a small smile, then checked Lily's positioning in the chair and her meds for the day. Behind them, the door opened. Catherine Vale stepped inside. Her expression was unreadable until she saw Emma sitting so close to Lily, smiling in that unguarded, sunlit way that children hadn't yet learned to hide. "Emma," she said sharply, "it's time for your tutoring session." Emma's face fell. "But we just started the second spell." "Now," Catherine said. David straightened but didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, too late for Catherine's liking. Emma stood slowly, glanced once at Lily, then trudged out with her grandmother, the tiara still clutched in one hand. As the door swung shut, David looked down at the forgotten wand on the floor. There were fractures in Catherine's control, and something told him they were about to widen. Upstairs, the executive briefing was already running behind. A miscommunication with legal had stalled the upcoming product launch timeline, and one of the IT directors had quietly pulled Catherine aside with something she didn't like. News that internal server logs showed unusual access to archived employee databases. "Specifically related to David Ellery," he murmured. "There's chatter in staff forums, mentions of Dr. E. Some of the interns even found an old medical journal that cross-referenced a neurology specialist by that name." Catherine stiffened. "You're saying this janitor was—" The director shrugged uncomfortably. "If it's the same man, he used to be a pediatric neurologist, a highly placed one." She didn't respond, not aloud. But her mind was already sprinting, connecting things she'd refused to see before. His posture, his silence, the unshakable steadiness. The way he handled Emma's mild seizure last month. She hadn't known it was a seizure until much later. And the EMT had mentioned someone on staff had stabilized her before their arrival. She had dismissed it. Now she realized it had likely been him, and the thought made her cold. Meanwhile, in the courtyard below, David sat beside Lily on their usual bench, watching pigeons peck crumbs from the stone floor. "Do you miss it?" Lily asked suddenly. He looked over. "Your old job, the brain-fixing one." He was quiet for a long moment. "Some parts." "Which ones?" "The ones where I made scared parents feel like maybe they'd sleep again that night." Lily leaned against his side. "You do that for me." He closed his eyes, the weight of her head pressing into him like an anchor. He'd made peace with leaving medicine, but he hadn't made peace with what the world assumed he was because of it. Later that day, he passed Marla at the front desk again. She didn't just nod this time. She stopped him. "Catherine's asking around about you." "I know." "She's not just curious, David. She's digging." David considered that. "Let her dig," he said quietly. "Truth doesn't spoil underground." Marla blinked at the phrasing, then gave a slow, reluctant smile. "Sometimes," she said, "you talk like a man who's waiting for a courtroom reveal." "I'm just making sure my daughter's kingdom stays standing," he replied. And with that, he pushed his cart down the corridor, past the suits, past the whispers, past the glass walls. Something was building, and it wouldn't be whispers for long. The ballroom was being reset for the quarterly gala, a black tie event with sponsors, investors, and too many appetizers for anyone to finish. David had been assigned to prep the stage area, polish the floor beneath the spotlight, and double-check the stair treads for safety compliance. It was work he did with precision, muscle memory built over years of watching other people's names get lit in gold. His own never needed to be. He ran the buffer one last time, then knelt to adjust the podium wires. The AV rig wasn't calibrated right, again, and he flagged the issue with a soft note left for the technician, suggesting a simple reroute through the side junction. He didn't sign it. He never did. He was standing at the far corner of the ballroom when it happened. A sharp cry, then a thud. David turned fast. Too fast. Emma! She was near the side buffet area, crumpled on the floor, her legs twisted awkwardly beneath her, one arm curled protectively around her stomach. Her face was pale, too pale, and her mouth moved but no sound came. People stood frozen. One woman screamed. David was already moving. His hands were steady, his voice calm. "She's in tonic phase. Don't move her head. Someone dim those lights." Nobody questioned him. No one even thought to. He dropped to his knees beside her, one hand checking her pulse, the other gently loosening the collar of her dress. Her body trembled with residual spasms. Her eyes fluttered. "Emma," he said softly. "Can you hear me?" A nod. Weak. Delayed. But there. He let out a breath. Not her first seizure. Not her worst either. He turned to the crowd. "Call 911. Tell them pediatric seizure, stabilized." "ETA?" 3 minutes, someone managed to say. David kept his hand on Emma's shoulder and another under her head, cushioning her against the cold floor. A few people pulled back chairs, gave him space, whispered things they didn't understand. Catherine arrived seconds later. She didn't scream, she froze. Emma, her granddaughter, lay on the floor, and the man she'd mocked, belittled, reassigned to a corner of invisibility, knelt over her with a calm that doctors practiced for years to earn. For a full 5 seconds, she couldn't speak. Then finally, "Is she?" "She'll be okay," David said without looking up. "Mild tonic-clonic. She's postictal now. Keep her on her side." "How do you—" He met her eyes, and in that moment, Catherine Vale saw something she couldn't explain, couldn't undo. Not defiance, not smugness, but experience. The kind that came from years spent in places where one mistake could cost a child their life. The kind she had no authority over. The paramedics arrived with swift efficiency, but the tension in their faces shifted the moment they saw David. One of them, a stocky EMT with graying temples, did a double take. "Dr. Ellery," he said, stunned. David gave a curt nod. "She's stable, vitals within margin, non-medicated, no visible trauma. You'll want to follow up on EEG and blood work. Her pupils are reactive." The EMT looked between David and the CEO. And Catherine knew then, with cold clarity, that everyone in that room had heard it. Doctor, not janitor. Doctor. David stood as they lifted Emma gently onto the stretcher. Her eyes were half-lidded, her fingers twitching slightly. He gave her a quiet reassurance, just under his breath. Catherine didn't move, didn't blink. The staff parted for the gurney and the medics. Whispers followed. Catherine stood in the middle of her ballroom, the one she controlled, designed, dominated, and suddenly, none of it felt like hers. She turned to David. "You were a neurologist." "I am a neurologist," he said, calm as still water. "I just don't practice anymore." "Why?" He met her stare evenly. "Because I chose something more important." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was defining. Someone had pulled out a phone, someone else was already uploading a photo. David didn't care. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't stay for questions. He just walked quietly to the far end of the ballroom, retrieved his mop, and returned to the floor where Emma had fallen. One of the tiles had been scuffed. He began cleaning it, not because it was his job, but because it was his choice. Outside, as the ambulance pulled away, Catherine stood on the steps beside the valet stand, the sunlight slanting against her face. Her assistant hovered nearby, wide-eyed. "Should I prepare a press release?" she asked carefully. Catherine didn't answer, because for the first time in years, she didn't know what she'd say. The news traveled faster than Catherine could contain it. By the following morning, a still frame from the ballroom, David kneeling calmly beside Emma, eyes focused, hands steady, had made its way into the internal ValeCorp employee forum. It wasn't leaked externally, not yet, but the caption said enough. "He's not just the janitor." Dozens of comments followed, some shocked, some reverent, some questioning how no one had ever known. But all agreed on one thing. There had been a doctor in the building all along, and the only person who had treated him like he mattered was a child in a wheelchair. Catherine sat behind her glass desk, staring at the screen. Her assistant hovered nearby, but wisely said nothing. The situation was unraveling. And the worst part? She couldn't spin it. Not with press, not with donors, not even with her board. There were rumors that Emma's pediatrician had recognized David's name from an academic journal, that a neurologist with his credentials had quietly left medicine 7 years ago. No formal scandal, no lawsuit. Just disappeared, like a candle blown out without sound. Until now. David was restocking supplies in the second-floor janitorial closet when the knock came. Marla. She didn't step inside, just leaned against the frame, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "You know it's spreading, right?" she said. David didn't pause in replacing the gloves. "Figured it would. She's going to approach you soon, probably today. PR's pushing her to. I'm not interested in being her redemption story." Marla studied him. "Then what are you interested in?" David closed the cabinet. "Keeping my daughter safe, giving her a life where the world doesn't mistake her smile for permission." Marla nodded slowly. "Well, you're not invisible anymore. That's either a gift or a warning." David gave her a small smile. "Usually both." Later that afternoon, he was cleaning the glass along the mezzanine balcony when Catherine approached. No heels this time, flats, no entourage, just her. She stood behind him for a moment too long before speaking. "I didn't know," she said. David didn't turn. "You didn't ask." She exhaled slowly. "You could have spoken up." "I did, just not in your language." He finished wiping the panel, then finally faced her. She looked different now, not smaller, but cracked. The kind of cracks that don't spread from age, they spread from impact. "What do you want, Ms. Vale?" "To understand." He tilted his head. "No, you want a version of this that doesn't make you look like the villain." She flinched. He didn't move in on the wound, just held the silence there. Let it sit between them, like a fog neither could wave away. "I didn't mean to humiliate you," she said. "You didn't humiliate me," he replied, voice low. "You humiliated my daughter." Catherine looked down at her hands. "She forgave you already," he added. "Kids do that. Adults just call it PR." She met his eyes again. "What happened, David? Why would someone like you choose this?" He hesitated. Then finally, "My wife died in a hospital I used to run. I couldn't save her. But Lily survived the crash, barely. And she needed more than just a doctor. She needed a father who could be there every single day. No call rooms, no night shifts, no headlines, just clean, ordinary presence. He gestured around. So I found something that let me give her that. Stability, routine, dignity. Catherine stared at him. And you never told anyone? They never asked. That evening, after the building had mostly cleared, David sat with Lily in the courtyard. She held the purple glass bead he'd given her days ago, hope, and spun it slowly in her fingers. Was Emma okay? She asked. She's doing better. The doctor said she'll need more checkups. Lily looked up. You helped her. I did. She told her grandma that she wants to be a doctor now. David smiled, eyes glinting. She said she wants to wear tiaras in the operating room. He laughed, a deep, quiet sound. I'd trust that, doctor. Lily leaned against him. I think you were always meant to do both. What's that? Fix brains and carry crowns. He looked down at her, heart thick with something too large for words. From across the courtyard, Catherine stood watching them, unnoticed, silent, still in flats. She didn't interrupt. She just watched. For once, she wasn't the one being watched. She was learning what it meant to witness. The next morning, David arrived early, not for cleaning, but because Lily had an early session with a physical therapist Vale Corp brought in once a week for employees' children. It was the one policy Catherine had never cut. Despite budget complaints from the board, David had never asked why. Maybe now he understood. Maybe it was guilt before it had a face. He set Lily up in the mirrored rehab room on the 7th floor, buckled her braces, helped her slide her feet into the parallel bars. The therapist, a kind man named Brent, gave David a subtle nod, one that had deepened with recognition since the ballroom incident. She's stronger this week, Brent said, watching her first attempt at balance. David smiled. She wants to dance again. She will. He stayed just long enough to see Lily take 4 unassisted steps before retreating into the hallway. As he turned the corner, he nearly collided with Catherine. David, she said, almost startled. Ms. Vale. She hesitated. I need to ask you something, off the record. David waited. We're developing a new outreach initiative, a community-based pediatric wellness branch, part of our corporate social good realignment. He raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a lot of words for a company pivot. Catherine didn't flinch. I want you involved. I'm not interested in the spotlight. This wouldn't be public-facing. You'd be behind the scenes, building protocols, reviewing strategy. The board respects you now. His expression didn't shift. Now. Catherine looked down, then back up. Yes, now. That's not a defense, just a fact. David folded his arms, watching her. You want me to clean up a crisis using the same skills you once dismissed as beneath you. I want you to help children, she said, the way you helped Emma. He studied her carefully. You don't know how to apologize, do you? Her mouth tightened. I'm trying. David looked past her, toward the glass where Lily's reflection moved in staggered rhythm between the bars. I'll review your plans, he said finally, but on one condition. Catherine waited. This isn't a favor. It's not a redemption project. If I join, it's because it helps kids, not because it makes the company look better. She nodded. Understood. And if I see one PR headline with my name on it, I'm gone. Another nod. Deal. By noon, David was in a quiet conference room with 2 division heads and an HR liaison. The wellness initiative was real, barely, but the structure was disjointed. Too many metrics, not enough people who understood field application. David scanned the planning documents without commentary. 15 minutes in, he started drawing corrections directly over the printouts. Not flashy, not rude, just swift notations. Timelines adjusted, goals reprioritized, medical logic inserted where buzzwords had been. The room grew quiet. Finally, one of the division heads leaned forward. You've done this before. David didn't look up. It used to be my life. Another whispered. He rewrote a full intake pipeline in 5 minutes. Catherine stood in the doorway, watching. She didn't speak, but her team was finally listening. Downstairs, Marla was the first to see it. On the internal employee feed, a poll had appeared under the community recognition section. Who's someone in the building who changed your view of strength? David's name was Winning. By a lot. The comments underneath weren't just praise. They were small testaments. He carried my mother's chair down 5 flights when the elevator failed. He fixed the panic button in the daycare himself. He always looks kids in the eye when he talks to them. No one mentioned Emma. No one needed to. The shift had already begun. That evening, as David and Lily left the building, the security guard at the lobby, normally reserved, silent, stood and handed something to Lily. A tiny keychain, shaped like a glass crown. "For the bravest queen I know," he said gruffly. Lily lit up. David nodded, a quiet thank you in his eyes. Outside, as the wind picked up and the city buzzed beyond the valet circle, David lifted Lily into the back seat of their modest sedan, double-checked her seatbelt, then closed the door. Catherine stood just inside the lobby, watching him again. She didn't wave, he didn't nod, but something passed between them, muted, heavy, and clear. This wasn't over, but it was beginning. The following week, David found himself back on the executive floor, not with a mop, but with a pen. The conference room smelled different during daylight, less like power and polish, more like too much air freshener and coffee gone cold. A young intern set a binder in front of him, thick with printouts labeled Vale Corp Pediatric Initiative, Phase 1. David opened it without ceremony. Catherine sat across from him, flanked by the legal lead and an operations liaison. This time, no one blinked at his presence. No one questioned why the janitor was reviewing top-level strategy documents. He was no longer a curiosity. He was now necessary. "Some of this is salvageable," David said, flipping to page 14. "But you're tracking symptoms, not systems. If you want to make a real impact, you need to treat the neighborhood as the patient, not just the child." The LPS liaison, a woman named Ruth, leaned in. Meaning, don't offer mental health evaluations for the kids if you're not addressing food insecurity or housing instability. You can't tell a 12-year-old to focus when he hasn't eaten since yesterday. The room went silent. Then Catherine nodded. "We'll integrate that framework." David turned another page. "You also need mobile care units. Not everyone has access to transportation, and some families won't step inside a corporate building on principle. Trust needs to be earned, not presumed." "Do you know anyone who could help design that model?" Ruth asked. David's eyes flicked up. "I designed one 6 years ago, for a teaching hospital in Boston." Ruth blinked. "Seriously?" Catherine didn't react. She already knew. By the 3rd hour, the meeting dissolved. David left behind a heavily marked binder, a thumb drive with implementation templates, and a stunned group of executives recalibrating how they viewed every quiet person in their building. He didn't stay for lunch. Instead, he returned to Lily, who was in the courtyard again, crown on her head, a circle of stuffed animals at her feet. Emma sat beside her, painting their faces with makeup, swiped from her grandmother's purse. "They're all queens now," Lily explained as David approached. "Even the tiger?" he asked. "Especially the tiger," Emma said proudly. David knelt beside them. "Everyone ready for court?" "They're voting," Lily whispered. "On what?" Emma leaned closer, conspiratorially. "Whether Grandma should let you come to the next family dinner." David blinked. "That's quite a trial." "She'll say yes," Lily declared, confident. "You helped her daughter." "She helped herself," David replied gently. "I just steadied her until she could stand again." That evening, Catherine appeared outside the maintenance wing, again without entourage, again in silence. David was finishing up floor checks with his replacement. He turned when she cleared her throat. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for continuing to work here, after all this." He didn't smile. "I never stopped working." Catherine glanced at the floor. "I meant not just staying physically, but staying grounded, staying kind." David's voice was steady. "I didn't take this job for you. I took it for Lily, and now I keep it because it gives me something no hospital ever could. Peace." She looked at him then. Really looked. Not at the man who knelt on scuffed tile with gloves in his pocket, but at the man who had once held children's futures in his hands, and now did it with quieter tools. If you ever want a full-time role on the initiative, she said, the door's open. No press, no title. Just work that matters. David considered it. I'll think about it. She nodded. We're holding a community launch next Friday. Emma asked if Lily could come. David's eyes softened. She'd like that. Catherine started to turn, then stopped. There's something else. Yes? I looked up your wife. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. Catherine paused. She was a researcher, biotech. David nodded. Brilliant, relentlessly hopeful, believed medicine was a story you could rewrite. She would have been proud, Catherine said quietly. She would have made me wear a suit to this job, David said dryly. They both smiled, a small, real smile. Then she left, and David stood in the hall alone, surrounded by echoing footsteps and the scent of lemon polish. The building still looked the same, but the air felt lighter. People no longer looked through him. They looked to him, and he carried that not as a crown, but as weight, the kind worth bearing. The day of the community launch dawned clear and warm. Vale Corp's Central Plaza had been transformed, folding chairs in neat rows, white tents flanking the walkway. A temporary stage set up in front of the fountain, where the company usually held quarterly press briefings. Now, instead of shareholders and slogans, the banners read, Care Begins at the Root. Vale Corp Pediatric Wellness Initiative, in partnership with our community. David stood near the edge of the crowd, dressed in his usual janitorial uniform. He could have worn a suit. Catherine had offered one. The board had even arranged a custom name badge, Dr. David Ellery, Strategic Consultant. But he declined it all. This wasn't about reclaiming his past. It was about owning his present. Lily sat in her wheelchair beside him, tiara secured, holding a handmade scroll labeled Royal Advisory Notes. Emma hovered nearby, excited and chatty, her curls pinned back with the same crown-shaped clip Lily had once worn. You're going up there, right? Emma asked, pointing to the stage. David shook his head. Not today, but they're saying your name. That's enough. Emma frowned. You should stand where everyone can see. Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. You already do. On stage, Catherine adjusted the mic and took a breath. Her voice was clear but uncharacteristically soft. No corporate steel today. Thank you all for coming. Today is not about the company I run, but about the people who keep it alive. Some of them wear suits, some carry tools, some wipe surfaces and still carry more wisdom in their silence than most of us speak in boardrooms. A few heads turned toward David. He won't let me list his degrees, she continued, and he won't stand beside me on this stage. But I wouldn't be standing here, my granddaughter wouldn't be well, without the quiet actions of someone most of us never even looked at twice. David felt the weight of 100 gazes shift to him. He didn't move, but Lily lifted her wand and gave a small ceremonial wave. Emma clapped once, starting a ripple of applause that grew, slow and uncertain, then rooted in something deeper, not spectacle, respect. Later, David walked the resource tents with Lily and Emma, introducing them to community volunteers, therapists, nutritionists, mobile unit staff, school counselors. Everyone had a clipboard and a mission. Everyone had a story. Near the end of the row, they reached a table with a hand-painted banner, Neurodivergent Families Network. Lily looked at the stickers, the drawings, the homemade zines written by kids who used AAC devices or drew their feelings with crayons instead of words. She was quiet, but her grip on David's hand tightened. These are kids like me, she whispered. David knelt beside her. Number. These are kids like us. She looked at him, puzzled. I'm still learning too, he said. Every day, because of you. She beamed, then turned to the nearest volunteer and offered her scroll. It's my idea book, she explained, for making therapy more like play. The woman read it carefully, then smiled. You should come speak at our next panel. I don't speak loud, Lily said. You don't have to, the woman replied. You just have to mean it. David watched, silent and full. That evening, when the tents were packed away and the plaza returned to marble and echo, David stood alone outside the supply room. His cart was parked neatly beside him. The floor was clean. The event had left behind no debris, but the building felt different now, as if something had shifted in its bones. Catherine approached quietly, holding a folder. "No cameras," she said. "Just this." She handed it to him. Inside was a letter of appointment. A consulting role for pediatric strategy with open scheduling, full benefits, and a salary that rivaled what he made in his last year as a neurologist. He didn't look at the numbers. He just stared at the closing line. "This position is created in recognition of the value you've always had, long before we knew your name." "I told you I didn't need a title," David said. "You don't," Catherine replied. "But others need to know it's possible to carry two truths. You can scrub floors and save lives. You can hold a mop and hold the future, sometimes in the same hand." David closed the folder slowly. "And if I say no?" She smiled faintly. "Then you'll still be the most respected man in this building." He looked toward the far hallway, where Lily's laughter echoed faintly as she told Emma a story about ruling a kingdom with kindness and glitter. Then he looked back at Catherine. "Let me think about it." That night, Lily curled into his side on the couch, crown askew, blanket tangled around her feet. "Did we win today?" she mumbled sleepily. David brushed hair from her eyes. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "We showed up. That's harder and better." Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, the man the world once overlooked held the world he'd chosen, with hands trained in precision, calloused by labor, and still capable of saving more than anyone ever expected. The press never got their headline. There were no splashy features, no "Janitor turned doctor saves CEO's granddaughter" story running on morning news. David had made sure of that. When the first media request hit Vale Corp's legal desk, Catherine intercepted it and quietly shut it down. She didn't do it to protect herself. Not anymore. She did it to protect something rarer. The dignity of a man who never asked for applause. But word still spread, organically through conversation, through staff whispers turned reverent mentions. A ripple, not a wave. And that ripple was changing things. Security guards stood a little taller. Cafeteria staff found themselves suddenly invited to all staff meetings. Receptionists' names were remembered instead of passed over. The hierarchy hadn't vanished, but the edges had blurred, and David had become its quiet epicenter. That Friday, David returned to his usual route. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He polished the same glass railings he had for years, his movements as precise as ever. He checked the same scuffed corners near the elevators and smiled faintly when he saw they had been freshly painted overnight. Someone had finally taken his long-ignored maintenance notes seriously. He wasn't here to climb anymore. He was here to root. As he passed by the fourth-floor conference wing, he heard a voice call softly from the corridor. "Doctor? Ellery?" He turned. It was Ruth, the operations liaison. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Force of habit now. Everyone's calling you that." "I answer to both," he replied, amused. She stepped forward, holding a small, glossy card. "The initiative board approved your full consulting role. I know you didn't ask for the nameplate, but—" David looked down. The card simply said, "David Ellery Neuroscience Advisor, Pediatric Systems Innovation. Vale Corp, no doctor, no excess, just truth." He nodded slowly, pocketing it. "Thank you." "There's one more thing," Ruth said. "Catherine wanted me to ask. There's an upcoming education summit next month. They're looking for someone to speak on adaptive care strategies, not public, closed-door medical roundtable." David hesitated. "I've been away from that world a long time." "Maybe," Ruth said, "but that world hasn't been the same without you." He didn't answer, not yet. But a thought settled in quietly. Maybe presence could be a kind of return, not to his old life, but to the part of himself he hadn't needed to bury, just wait for. That night, Lily asked if she could sleep with the window open. "It smells like the weekend," she said, smiling. David tucked her in, smoothing the edge of her blanket, adjusting the tiara resting on the nightstand. "Can Emma sleep over next Friday?" "We'll ask," David said. "She said I'm her hero now, but I didn't do anything." He smiled. "You reminded someone to look again. That's harder than fixing things." Lily tilted her head. Is that what you do? David thought about it. The mop, the gloves, the quiet precision. The old hands that used to cut into tissue and now sealed janitor closet latches with equal care. No, he said. That's what we do. Elsewhere in the building, Catherine stood at her office window long after everyone had gone. The city lights stretched beneath her like a grid of possibility. She glanced down at her desk, at the medical textbook she'd pulled from storage. Pediatric Neuroplasticity and the Developing Brain. Inside, a yellowed page was marked, co-authored by Dr. David Ellery. She traced the faded paper with one hand, then shut it gently. Some debts couldn't be paid, but they could be acknowledged. She stepped into the hallway and made her way to the elevator. She didn't call for a driver, didn't ask for the car. Instead, she walked down to the maintenance wing. It was empty, except for one thing. David's cart, freshly restocked, stood beside a mop wringer. But taped to the side was something she hadn't seen before. A child's drawing. 2 stick figures. One with a crown, the other with a mop. Both smiling. Above them, scribbled in crayon, "My dad saves people even when no one sees him do it." She stood there for a long time. Not because she needed to, because it was time she did. That weekend, the employee newsletter quietly announced a new section, Spotlight on Quiet Excellence. There was no photo of David, just a quote. He didn't say much. But the day we followed his lead, the company got better. No one questioned it. Some things didn't need a name to be felt. Some legacies didn't need marble or medals. Sometimes they just needed a daughter in. A tiara, a mop beside a door, and a man who never stopped showing up. It rained the morning Lily presented her tiara report. David had double-checked the weather, packed an umbrella, and still ended up soaked from the knees down by the time they reached the company's new community annex, a repurposed floor of the old warehouse building, now transformed into the Pediatric Initiative's heart. Inside, the walls were painted with murals of children's hands and bright-colored forests. The waiting room smelled like fruit snacks and fresh paper. Lily's name was already written on the day's activity board. Guest speaker, Lily Ellery, Royal Advocate for Fun Therapy. She looked up at David as he helped fix her curls. "Are they going to think I'm silly?" "No," he said gently. "They're going to think you're the bravest girl in the room." Her fingers gripped his tighter. "Even the grown-ups?" He smiled. "Especially the grown-ups." The gathering wasn't large, just a mix of volunteers, pediatricians, staff parents, and a few community members. Lily wheeled herself to the front, with David trailing a respectful distance behind. When she cleared her throat to begin, the room fell quiet. "My name is Lily Ellery," she said, voice small but firm. "And I think kids heal better when they get to play." She lifted her handmade scroll and read from it. "In the hospital, sometimes things hurt. And when things hurt, you feel little. But if someone gives you a crown or a wand or a dragon sticker, you remember you're not just scared, you're still you. Even if your legs don't work all the time, even if you can't talk loud, even if you're tired a lot." David watched her, barely breathing. "My daddy made up a game called Rain Practice. It's pretend. But it made me brave for real things, like therapy, and surgeries, and meeting people." She unrolled the scroll further. "So, this is my royal plan. Every therapy room should have dress-up boxes, animal chairs, and space for big feelings. Because play isn't extra, it's armor." Someone in the front row sniffled. Someone else clapped. By the time she finished, the room had changed, not loudly, but deeply. And David knew, without question, that this was her world now, her court, her voice, her crown. Not his shadow to protect, but her stage to step into. After the presentation, as Lily accepted a small bouquet from the volunteer coordinator, Catherine approached David with something in her hand. A folder, again. But this one was thin. Inside, just 2 documents. He opened them slowly. The first, a formal resignation form, his janitorial role officially ending. The second, an appointment confirmation, this time with a single line. David Ellery, Director of Pediatric Systems Innovation. No badge, no title game, just the work. Full autonomy, flexible schedule, no publicity. She insisted, Catherine said, nodding toward Lily. She told the board you could do more if they got out of your way. David chuckled softly. She negotiates harder than most executives I've known. She learned from the best. He signed the form. For the first time in years, not to let go of something, but to claim it. Later that evening, he and Lily sat beneath the awning of their small porch, watching the rain dot the sidewalk in slow, calming rhythms. Her tiara was still on, crooked now, smudged with frosting from the celebration's cupcake she hadn't finished. "You're not going to be a janitor anymore," she said, half asleep against his shoulder. "No," he whispered. "I think I've got a new job." "Still helping people?" "Always." She nodded. "Promise you won't stop mopping sometimes. You're really good at it." He kissed the top of her head. "I won't stop." He never had. And he never would. Some stories aren't built on fame. They're built on floors scrubbed with care, on hands that once held scalpels now learning how to hold tiaras without shaking, on men who choose humility not because they lack power, but because they finally understand where real strength lives, in laughter under fluorescent lights, in daughters who call you hero, not for what you fix, but for how you show up, in rooms that forget your name until you become the reason they remember what names actually mean. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. The principal laughed when I enrolled my daughter. Late, then she saw my name on the Charter Foundation. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?